and welcome back to AR77. Today we've got a bit more revolver love for you. For those of you who like revolvers, hopefully you'll enjoy this video. For those of you who don't, you're really the people that I'm talking to. I would say that I agree with the title of this video. You deserve a revolver, and you might be selling yourself short by thinking you don't. Or by thinking, actually, what has a revolver got to offer me? I like my 1911s, I want a Glock, I want a Beretta. All these, perhaps you would argue, more modern in certain ways, kind of semi-automatic replicas. You know, the Combat Master, doesn't that look cool? The M17, doesn't that look cool? Yes, I agree with all of that. I've got all of those in my collection, but I also have plenty space for these revolvers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up a few arguments as to why you might not want a revolver, and then hopefully I'm going to give you the counter arguments. So at the end of this video, you'll be cursing me because I will be costing you over £100 or whatever the equivalent is in your country, because you will feel, do you know what? I must go out there tomorrow and buy one of these delicious looking revolvers. Okay, so let's look at why you might not want a revolver. Well, you might go, do you know what? They are just 6 shots per cylinder. There's only 6 rounds, and I'm not interested in shooting something that has a revolver style action because of that. I only get to shoot 6 before I'm reloading. Well, one possible argument I would put to that is something like the 226 here by Sig Sauer. It looks like a semi-automatic, but we're not kidding anyone. This is actually just a revolver anyway. So you're shooting 8. Yes, you only have to turn it around and rotate it, and you can shoot another 8. But it's still not like shooting a semi-automatic, really, or an automatic pistol. It's still shooting a revolver. So you are still shooting at limited capacity if you have something like that in your, let's call it, an arsenal. The other thing is, and this is the bigger point, having that limited ammo makes it more of a challenge when you're shooting. You've got more invested in each round that you shoot. So there's more riding on it. If you're shooting at targets and things, you know you've only got 6 in the cylinder, and it gives you pause for thought. You're not just blasting away. You're taking time to better aim your shot. And actually, as a training tool, something like a revolver might be quite good for something like that, actually. But even just, you know, for the sake of it, as part of the hobby of target shooting or shooting at cans, plinking in the back garden, when you've got more invested in each shot, it makes it sometimes a richer experience. I'm not saying it makes it better, but there's certainly room for that. I would also say that limited ammo, you know, it adds to the pleasure of shooting it because of that. It adds to the challenge. You know, each time, this is the 715 4-inch by Dan Wesson, each time you've spent all your rounds, you have to stop, take that out, eject your spent shells, load it back up, and that's half the joy of it. You know, stopping, checking things out, you know, thinking what you'll do differently next time. Am I aiming high? Am I aiming low? Is it the way I've got my sights lined up, or is it just that I'm not aiming properly? It's honestly, and this sounds a bit crazy, it's quite zen. Actually, just to stop, eject those shells, get some new ones loaded in, and while you're loading them, you're looking downrange, you're looking at your target, you're thinking, right, I'm not going to miss that this time. This time, I've got it. And you're back, loaded up, and ready to go once again. So there's something of that to it, I would argue. Plus, you can use a speed loader if you want to speed up the whole process. Now, I will concede that with some of the earlier Dan Wessons, like this 6-inch, the BB version, there were issues with the speed loader because it didn't kind of, the cylinder didn't come free enough of the frame, as you can see there, and because of the size of the grips and everything and the shape of the speed loader, it didn't work as well as it should have done. I mean, it does. You can see if I get that there, it does work, but it's a little bit of a fiddle just to get things lined up properly. So I will concede that is a bit of an issue with the speed loaders there. Having said that, if we come to the more modern, the 715 here, which also comes with a speed loader. Where is it there? This is the pellet version. This one is a bit better. It's free of the slide, and you can see that that slots in there nicely, and with a bit of a push, that loads those very easily into the cylinder there. So if you want to do quick reloads and you're concerned that a revolver doesn't give you the option to do that, I would say that's not really a valid point. What I would also say is this: when you've got rounds out of the gun, what I'll often find is, I get my shells here, I often take 2 at a time, and I'm loading 2 by 2 by 2, and as you can see, that takes no time at all. So as long as you've got all your pellets and things set up ahead of time, you shouldn't have an issue with that. Also, there are other pistols that are not revolvers that are, you know, equally, if not more laborious to reload. Take something like the M17 here by Sig Sauer. If you look at the mag for this, you've got obviously this kind of two-part design really. You've got to drop the mag, you've got to eject the actual magazine itself, open that back bit up, start loading these with your pellets, wind it round, feed them round, load it up, close that back up, put that back in there, and then, and only then, can you put it back into the pistol. So I would say that takes as long as it takes, although there's more rounds in there, there's 20 rounds in that magazine, but it does still take a fair bit of time to reload it. And people might say, well, this is the problem, you see, with these shells, you've got to reload twice, because you've got to eject the shells, then you've got to put your pellet in, then you've got to put that back in the gun. Well, that's not really the case. If we look at something like the Schofield here, I mean, this is true of the where is it now? Where's it gone? This is true of the Dan Wesson also. As you can see, because your shells are rear loading here, you can just stick them in there. You don't have to eject the shells at all. You can just reload your pellets that way. Similar to, as I said, the Schofield. We've got that top breech action here, and that opens up. You've got your shells there, and you can just load them straight into the back. Now, I get that if it's the BB version, like the Dan Wesson that I showed you before, these shells are slightly different. These are the BB ones, and these are the front-loading BB ones. So you're going to struggle in that instance. However, there are other guns, i.e. the Colt Single Action Army, which, let me just throw that gate open there. These are BB shooting BB shells as well. There you go, just drop one out. They're BB shooting shells as well, but these load from the rear, so you could just leave that in, load a BB, rotate your cylinder, load a BB, rotate your cylinder again. So you don't have to kind of double load if that was your fear. That's not really something that should stand in your way of getting and owning something as pretty as what you can see on the table in front of you. Also, it's worth bearing in mind if you're blasting away with something like I don't know, like a USP or a 92 or a 1911, your CO2 is constantly cooling, and if you're bothered about having that extra power, you're going to want to let it get back up to something like room temperature or a decent temperature outdoors if you want to get the most of your CO2. And if you have to stop to reload something like this, it gives your CO2 chance to warm back up, certainly in countries where that's an issue. Also, and it goes without saying, these are non-blowback, so you're going to get arguably more shots per CO2. You know, you're not necessarily going to make a massive difference, but you know, you're not necessarily going to get 100 shots from one of these where you'd only get 50 from a blowback. I'm not suggesting that the difference is going to be that significant, but certainly you're going to see more from your CO2 because you're firing less each time, there's no blowback, and you're giving the CO2 capsule time to warm up a little bit in between each session. Now, some of you may say, well, I get it, but aren't they just quite old-fashioned? Well, the 715 isn't old-fashioned. That's a pretty recent handgun. And if it's old-fashioned that you're worried about, then you don't want something like a 1911 in your collection. You don't want something like a USP in your collection. You don't want something like a Beretta 92 in your collection because, to all intents and purposes, they aren't modern firearms. They are replicas of of decades old, in some cases centuries old firearms. So if it's old-fashioned that is getting in your way, I see your point, but actually there's not a lot of modernity to something like a 1911, actually. I think also we realise, you know, as replica collectors, we realise that we are dealing in the world of replicas. So for the most part, you know, you're holding something that has already been on the market in its real steel version for months, if not longer. So that's something else you might want to just bear in mind when you use that as a hurdle to get over instead of purchasing a revolver. I think one of the benefits of revolvers, and I've probably said this 100 times before, is, you know, as a tool for getting familiar with how a gun works, it's a pretty good kind of teaching platform. You know, you've got all your trigger discipline to take care of, your hammer, your relationship with the sort of release and things like that. All of these things are kind of pistol fundamentals. If you wanted to use this as a lower danger, cheaper ammo alternative to getting someone familiar with the world of guns or firearms. I do get that with something like a revolver, you're not going to get the recoil in an air gun that you would from the real steel. And that's where something like the Glock 17 is a good pistol, because it blows back, so it is going to give you some kind of feel of recoil, and that's why something like that as a training tool, as a semi-automatic, that might be more appropriate for that sort of purpose, for familiarity, because at least you're going to have to get used to a little bit of kick, even though it's not comparable to the real kick of an actual real steel bullet firing from a gun. But in terms of fundamentals and learning your way around the parts and operations of a gun, a revolver is a good place to start. Learn, you know, in a straightforward way, how the mechanisms of a gun work, and I think that's quite a useful thing, and it's a nice way to do it using a revolver. Right, let's get him out of the way. I mean, one of the big points is that there is a tactile pleasure in cocking and firing. You know, holding a beautiful collector's piece of engineering like that is a pleasure. You know, you've got something here like the Colt Defender. If I were to measure that Colt against that Colt, there's no contest. This does very little. You can pull the trigger, you can't cock the hammer. It's a nice little gun, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't do an awful lot. Whereas there's nothing like the pleasure of cocking that and releasing that hammer. There's something really tactile, and I constantly use that term, something tactile and rewarding, and again, dare I say it, quite zen about owning and operating one of these. Also, they're quite handy, these revolvers. You know, there isn't a single, well, there is one of my revolvers, only the Colt Python. Out of all my revolvers, the Colt Python is the only one that requires a separate piece to load the CO2, because the CO2 goes in the grip like that. It's a lovely looking gun, isn't it? Yeah, that's the only one that requires the Allen key or the hex key or whatever to load the CO2. All the others have a tool for loading the CO2 integrated into the grip itself. That's true of the Smith & Wesson, of the Single Action Army, the Schofield, and the Dan Wesson itself. All of those guns have something in the grip like, where is it there, like that, or it's a fixed one or something like that. They all have something which means that you don't need a separate tool with you, other than the Colt Python. But I mean, look at him. Just by looking at him, you can tell he's arrogant, can't you? So, long story short, too late, I know. Just look at them. They are gorgeous, and they are almost perfect replicas of the real steel variants. So if you do not own one, I would highly recommend you add a revolver to your collection today. If I haven't won you over with that, I possibly never will, and I will back away from the challenge. Thanks for watching. Please do take care, stay safe, all the very best. Bye.